Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for attending to today's webinar. My name is Jesus Mingarro, and I lead the sales team here at Prosperon. And today with me, I've got Rob Mandeville, which is a SolarWinds product marketing manager and a chap that has worn many hats. Rob, are you with us?
I am, yes, thank you.
Perfect. So, what are you going to talk about today? Obviously, I guess today is the culprits of the series of webinars that we've done. The first one was about understanding the difference between database health and performance. The second one on the series was a hypothetical world where resources were no longer constrained, and what would be the things that DBA should really look into in that hypothetical world, which we pretty much decided that is not really that far off from today. So what's today? What are you going to be covering today?
Yeah, so I thought I might recap a little bit of kind of what brought us to this point, but really the prior two webinars were focused on almost more like philosophical or kind of high level kind of topics. And I thought today maybe it would be good to actually, see how this would be represented within a product. So today my focus was going to be a live drive-through of Database Performance Analyzer.
So this is more kind of a practical hands-on where you kind of take everything that you've learned over the previous two webinars and put it into practice. Is that fair to say?
That's right. That's right. The first two were kind of, hey, why should I care? And now it's, hey, this is a product that can really help you in your day-to-day responsibilities and tasks to understand and really see a profile of your environments as a DBA in a way that you may not have ever seen it before. We often get people when they first start looking at it through the eyes of DPA, they immediately discover significant performance issues that they did not even know existed. Jesus, are you there?
Yes, I am.
There we go.
I was saying that I hope that everyone finds it as interesting as it sounds. Just as a quick reminder, today's webinar is interactive and it's very important to count with your participation so that we can keep this session as useful as possible and ensure that you guys walk away with valuable insight. For that, we have two ways of getting your input. The first one is going to be by voting on the polls that will be displayed on your screen. And we'll be asking you a couple of questions throughout the session, and we'd kindly request that you submit your answers because obviously based on the responses we can steer better the content displayed, the demos, and obviously the scenarios that we present. And the other way of interacting with us is going to be asking direct questions. You can type them on your chat box on the GoToWebinar panel. We will be monitoring this very closely, and on each one of these sessions, we'll either read it back to Rob for him to answer, or we can do that offline while he's going. We also will have a Q&A block of time at the end. So if we don't answer that question immediately, please be assured that we will review it at some point. And here comes the first poll. Let me see if I can launch it. This should be a fairly straightforward one. Do you guys currently use any of the SolarWinds tools that are available? And this can be across the whole of spectrums of network performance monitor or any network-related products, anything that is related to systems that would include SAM, vMan, Storage Resource Monitor, or DPA, absolutely, or even Web Help Desk and the subtools or the smaller tools. I think we have a few answers now, so let's close this poll. Here the results. So the majority of the attendees today have SolarWinds or use SolarWinds tools. So I'm hopeful that obviously they're going to get perhaps a bit more than those that haven't had any sort of exposure previously to SolarWinds. Perfect. Let's continue. Whoop. Okay, so moving forward, a bit of introduction about Prosperon. We're the leading UK authority on deploying, tuning, and training users of SolarWinds products. And there are mainly three reasons, or perhaps categories, where you guys really engage with us. So on one side, we have customers or users that are already using SolarWinds. Some of them are new to the tools, and some of them may have been using it for as long as we've been in business. But there's always a common denominator. and that is that they're looking for ways to improve what they get out of the tool. So it may be ways of optimizing the platform, either based on the performance that they're experiencing or the degree of usability. They could be looking at implementing best practices, automation, or perhaps just assistance with upgrading the modules that you have in place. They may also be looking at ways of increasing the efficiency of the tool. Sometimes you can achieve that by integrating it with other systems of your ecosystem. So we get engaged before implementation, perhaps when SolarWinds is being benchmarked or evaluated against other options. And this type of users or customers may be looking to understand the implications of implementing a tool like SolarWinds, or perhaps recommendations around architectural designs, about planning, and in certain scenarios, they need a company that can document all these requirements from the commercial aspects all the way down to low-level design documents and etc. The final category would be those of you that reach out for assistance once the tool is in place. So primarily this includes technical support, but more often than not is also about general advice on how to achieve certain things or get perhaps a second opinion on a strategy. What backs up the level of service that we aim to provide is purely our experience. So when Prosperon was founded, SolarWinds had only one product, and that was NPM. And if my memory serves me well, it was perhaps around version 7. As most of you perhaps know, NPM now is on version 12, and the SolarWinds ecosystem has grown astronomically since. So we've been for 11 years solely focused on SolarWinds exclusively. SolarWinds is pretty much all we do. We breathe monitoring, and we have been engaged with some of the largest deployments of SolarWinds across Europe. All of our engineers are SolarWinds SCP certified, and from the screen you can see that we pretty much on site one of every 3 days of the year. So we've had exposure to highly secure installations, to deployments that are very large and also small, and pretty much across every vertical. So we understand the hurdles that you need to go through, and that the resources that you have available tend to be limited. So what we try to do is always aim at engaging with you in the most efficient way possible and keep integrity as the foundation of our engagement. To finalize, the next screen outlines the added value that is provided when you guys renew your annual licenses or the maintenance with Prosperon. Support is by far one of the major ones because we complement SolarWinds' own support, aiming to reduce the time that it takes for your issues to get resolved. In practical terms, what it means is that when you're requesting support to Prosperon, either you'll get the response from us directly, or if it needs to be escalated to SolarWinds, we manage the ticket on your behalf. So you have to be less involved and concentrate on the things that matter to you. On top of that, you get a free health check of your SolarWinds platform. And the reason why this is relevant is because we probably performed over 150 health checks over the last couple of years, and we keep seeing the same gaps. And it's not necessarily talking, this is not just talking about how attractive or clever the network maps are or the dashboard, but rather the fact that not many of you are using the advanced features that SolarWinds have, perhaps as well as you could. And in some cases, they are not really used at all. And what's really important about this is that these advanced features are the ones that can contribute heavily in reducing the time that you need to spend managing the platform by implementing, obviously, automation tasks whenever possible. So the good things, I guess, and this is more relevant to today's webinar, is that probably one of the modules that pretty much comes fully prepared out of the box and that requires the least of customization is Database Performance Analyser, and I'm sure that Rob can expand on that point, but certainly allow him to explain better once we go into the demo. And without further ado, just the second poll, which I'm going to launch right now. Are you guys currently using a database monitoring tool? So far, this is looking very promising, Rob. I'm going to share the details in a sec, but it's around 65% yes.
Oh, excellent.
So let's close the poll and share the results. And there you have it, 65 exactly. So a third of the audience have some sort of database monitoring and management tool. So. Perfect, Rob. So what I'm going to do is make you the go back. I'm gonna make you the presenter. I need to get used to this mouse.
Yeah. Okay. So can you see my screen? I just want to make sure that I'm presenting properly.
I can indeed. So what I'll do is keep an eye on the questions that are coming in, and if I believe that some of them are relevant enough, obviously, to stop you, I'll pose the question onto you, and then you can perhaps steer the demo one way or the other.
Perfect. Yeah, sounds great. So thank you very much, and welcome everyone for joining us today. My name is Rob Mandeville, as Jesus mentioned. I'm a product marketing manager with SolarWinds. However, prior to moving and coming over to the dark side of marketing, I spent 15 years in and around databases, including a lot of different flavors. So SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, Postgres, even logged into DB2 a couple times, although I would never admit that in public. I have spent the last few years focused on database performance, so that has really become my passion now. One thing that I would like to mention real quick at the beginning here, in the poll, the first poll, it said that 78% of you use SolarWinds products. So, and I really should wait until fourth quarter to talk about this, but I'm in Boulder, you guys are in the UK. So I think you're about 5 days ahead, which puts you in the fourth quarter. So I think it's permissible. But one really cool thing that's coming with the next release of DPA, and specifically the DPA integration module, is some integration with PerfStack. So if anyone's leveraging an Orion product right now, the ability to bring the database data and metrics into PerfStack is on its way. So if you're looking for that really cool end-to-end visibility, you're going to have it, right? Yeah, go ahead.
There was some degree of integration, right? Visibility onto AppStack before. Now it's coming into PerfStack, correct?
That is correct. So there was a degree of integration for sure. We did some application to database mapping. We also did some storage object to database mapping. So we kind of plugged into both SAM and SRM. So server and application monitor plus storage resource monitor. But now we are coming to AppStack, PerfStack, which I'm really, really excited about. So just to give a real brief glimpse here, can't really show too much here, but this is so cool. Okay.
Wow. So, that's very, very useful. Not the type of thing that you can share down in a pub, but certainly something that's trying to.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time showing this just because it is a future feature, not a current one.
So you haven't seen anything, right? This is what you're trying to say.
Exactly. And the only reason I can show that is that you guys are already in the fourth quarter, I believe. So, and if you're not, don't tell me otherwise. Okay. All right. 11 years. Wow, you guys look so young. Okay. So if folks on the call, if you're like me, one of the toughest parts about troubleshooting performance issues is just knowing where to begin, right? So some things are pretty obvious, like if you run into a memory or CPU constraint issue, those are easy to see. However, like we talked about in one of the previous sessions here, those are becoming a lot less frequent, right? We're kind of moving into this big resources world. Hey, I think I might have just coined a phrase there, like big data, big resources. Anyway, what I mean by big resources is that, CPU clock speeds have gotten so fast. The amount of RAM that you can leverage is huge. I mean, we're talking terabytes now. Network bandwidth in most data centers is just fantastic. I rarely see an environment without 10 gig Ethernet anymore. Even storage with SSDs has had that order of magnitude jump in speeds. So with all these improvements with hardware resources and the ability to get them at our fingertips, and now they're relatively inexpensive, they're being commoditized, it's not as often as it once was that they are the things in our environments that are creating the bottlenecks. Now, keep in mind, I'm definitely not saying feed the beast. There are certainly licensing considerations to take into account when you're adding processors, because most major database vendors do license at the core level, so just be cognizant of that. But if those aren't the primary reasons for bottlenecks in our environments anymore, or at least becoming less prominent, where does that leave us? So with these resources, at our disposal and easy to spin up and provision, and now I'm thinking like virtualization and hypervisors and stuff where, we can have resources provisioned within minutes versus weeks or months. The focus for on-premise deployed database infrastructure really moves on to other potential bottleneck issues. Things like blocking, poorly written SQL, poor data models, lack of archiving strategy, optimizer choosing a bad plan. Okay, you guys get the idea there. Let me touch on one last concept before we jump into the demo proper. So likely you know that any database process can be in one of three states at any given time. It can be running, runnable, or suspended. If you think of like a grocery store, those at the cashier that are being checked out are running, those waiting in line are runnable, and any other activity is considered suspended. So those will be tracked by these things called waits. And that, by the way, that's W-A-I-T, not W-E-I-G-H-T. But if you are constrained by running or runnable processes, believe me, that is a really good problem to have because that is easily fixable. That is easily resolvable. It's the suspended activities that usually cause, the biggest headaches or the bulk of the bottlenecks in our environment. So what are these activities? In a very general sense, they're things like disk I/O, transactions waiting on a lock to be released, overhead aggregating a parallel execution, persisting a committed transaction to the transaction log, writing things to the redo log, depending on if you're on SQL or Oracle, and operating system call, etc. So those things are the suspended activities.
On your analogy, Rob, sorry to interrupt, on your analogy would be like the people that are just browsing, going up and down the aisles, searching for products or comparing and things like that, right?
Yeah.
Are items that at some point will become runnable, hopefully, but obviously they're just there.
Absolutely. Either they're searching for whatever they're going to get from the grocery store, or maybe they run into a neighbor and have to stop and talk out of being polite.
That's a must.
Yeah. Maybe they're waiting at the deli counter for another customer to get their order served up, so they're being blocked. So you can think of a lot of analogies that kind of come into play, but basically what it means is you're not actually getting the work done. So that is what we want to focus on, because that is where, like I said, the most of the headaches or bottlenecks in environments in a modern environment is caused by these suspended kind of activities. That's right. So by tracking where the database is spending its time and on what activities, it actually does allow us to easily identify why things are running slow. It does show you the root cause of the bottlenecks by using this methodology, and by tracking it at a granular enough level, it allows you to answer those important questions in your environment, like the who, what, when, where, and especially the why. Things are slow questions. So if anybody on this call has ever been in a rapid response team meeting, and you can call it whatever you want, I've heard it referenced by many different names, but then you know the uncomfortable nature of having to answer to someone who's not happy, who definitely wants answers and wants them now, and this is really what DPA will allow you to do, right? Number one, it allows you to determine if the performance hit is or was related to the database or not. So it's kind of your either get out of jail free card, or hey, if it was the database, that's fine, but you will know it. And if it was the database, it will tell you why, which is a much more comfortable situation to be in because you have answers, right? You can say it was the database definitively. You can say why it was the database definitively, and that allows you to come up with a plan to mitigate it moving forward, which is exactly what people that are not happy about performance want to hear. So, and DPA will do this using empirical data. And you're like, What? Like you mean I can actually prove what it was that was killing performance? Yes, with DPA you can. Okay, so let's jump into DPA and see how this looks within the product. When I work with a lot of customers, I usually see three common use cases, and those use cases are, hey, something's melting down right now in my environment, so it's very current, very real time. The other use case is something happened in the past, and maybe George down the row or somewhere in another department comes up to me at lunch and says, hey, things were really slow yesterday afternoon. Can you tell me why? So it's kind of that post-mortem idea, a look back in history to find out what happened. And then the other one is because we have so much free time, but because we have so much free time, or we do want to get kind of ahead of the curve a little bit, to be proactive. So it's looking at our environment in a very general sense and saying, how can I make things better for my end users? How can I improve performance in a general sense so that we don't run into some of these bottlenecks in the future? So let's kind of go through those three cases. The first one is the current scenario, so things are melting down right now. And here within DPA, I'm drilled into an instance specifically here, this DPA SQL 2016, so a relatively current version of SQL Server. I think 2017 is coming out or imminent, or maybe it just got released, I'm not sure. So let's go into current and let's see how this looks. So I click on current, it's going to give me a very contemporary view of what's happening right now within this instance. Bear in mind that the time frames might not be different because you guys are 5 days ahead, right? Okay.
We are, absolutely.
Perfect. That's what I like to hear. So if I click on Show Active Sessions, I can look at anything currently running against the database, right? So here I get to see the SQL hash and the SQL handle. If I click on it, I can actually see the SQL statement that is running, so that's awesome. So if this was coming from a program or an application that somebody was concerned about or calling in from an end user perspective, I can see the active sessions running here, and even better, I can tell you what it's waiting on. So in this case, it's doing some physical I/O back to disk, right? So if it is the database, I can see it here. By the way, if I refresh this, and either I don't see any active sessions, or I don't see the application that is in question or that someone is calling in about or opened a ticket on, guess what? That application is not waiting on the database for anything. So you are off the hook.
We can pass the baton then, right? And blame the network.
Always blame the network or storage. Take your pick. Try to alternate though and spread out the pain a little bit. But that's right. So that's a scenario where we've got a current kind of dig in and let's find out what's going on. Let's find out if it's me or not, right? As the DBA, the database professional. There's also this ability to look back in history. So when I click into an instance, I get this trend view of the last 30 days. What this is days of detail, we call it. So by detail, I mean that I can drill into any of these time frames and get down to a second-by-second activity for SQL statements hitting my database environment. So pretty tight granularity there. It's pretty awesome. Usually you don't need that kind of granularity, but periodically we do. You really want to find out what is happening at any exact moment in time in the past 30 days. But let's say in this case, I get a call, George again, over in accounting. He's like, hey, things were slow. Things started really getting slow on September 22nd. So I can say, okay, let's go into September 22nd and kind of see what happened. Oh yeah, boy, when I click in there, and by the way, this is kind of the follow the big bar mentality, right? Because that is going to point to where all the wait time is. So it's actually a pretty good methodology as far as sleuthing goes. But I can totally see that my profile changed, right? It was almost no activity or very flat activity up until around 3 o'clock or sometime within the 3 o'clock hour, and then it started to go south. So let's dig in a little bit further. Let's click on the 3 o'clock time frame. I can see, oh yeah, boy, it really started to head south right at 3:40. Well, let's go ahead and click that as our context. One thing to mention here is pay attention to the breadcrumbs up above here. You guys can kind of see it in this darker gray line up here. That line, those breadcrumbs are always going to represent the context that you're in. Okay, so this is how you can get your bearing. This is almost like your GPS, right? So I know that I'm in this server on this day within the 3 to 4 1-hour time period, and then also within this 10-minute chunk of window. So if I drill in further to maybe a specific wait type, or if I drill into a specific SQL, it'll go ahead and add that context to my breadcrumbs. So I can always kind of keep track of where I'm at in the product. Okay, so here I click in and I'm down to a 10-minute time frame. I can look at my top SQL that's running, and by the way, this defaults to the top 50 SQL statements. You can always expand that time series if you want to. But some really great information when I'm within this 10-minute time period. So I can see my top SQL, I can see the SQL statement itself, so what is running. I can see the overall impact to my end users from a time perspective. So, you know, in a 10-minute time period, I'm almost at 10 minutes of service time for my end users for this query anyway. And then probably most importantly, I can see what activities this query was spending its time on. So I do see that I have some locking going on here at the end, but that was fairly minimal. I've got some processing going on, so this is memory CPU, so this is either running or runnable. So keep that in mind, keep that in the back of your mind. Now, in most environments and most contexts, memory CPU is the activity that I want to see. That means I'm getting work done, right? So that means I'm not suspended. But then I see this light green color, which represents this lock MIX. By the way, if anybody wants to know what that represents for that specific wait type, go ahead and click on it here in the legend, and it'll bring up a little description as to what that wait is. Okay, so we try to build in some self-help kind of stuff, some documentation right into the product here. If I want to know more about this specific SQL statement, I just click it, and it brings me my statistics for it. So I know that during this 10-minute time period, this guy had 63 executions, processed over 900,000 rows, and had to do about 10,000, a little north of 10,000 logical reads to find those 900,000 rows. Pretty efficient fetch, actually, of the data. So not too concerned about that. If I want to get an idea of what the optimizer was thinking for this statement, I click on Plans, drill in a little bit further, and I get this graphical representation of where it was spending its cost, where the optimizer was saying that this guy was going to spend its time. So it looks like an index scan. Good. Well, even though we weren't spending as much time here, an index scan is probably less than optimal, right? Ideally, you'd want to seek there. So that's doing a full table scan. But really the majority of the time was spent doing this index update. So maintaining the index behind the object on this one. If I want to download the plan, I can move that over and go ahead and import it into Management Studio. If you guys prefer to look at it over there, no worries. And here I can see in my breadcrumbs that I've added all those different kind of click-throughs to my context.
Rob, while we are on that query, and that's a question that comes from the attendees, so would you be able to see how many times a query has been executed in that time frame?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was part of the statistics that we collect, right? Is during this 10-minute time period. Now, if I wanted to, I could drill out to a 1 hour, and let's go ahead and do that. Click into the query again, and you'll see that I have a different statistical count because now I'm not zoomed into a 10-minute time period. I'm zoomed out to an hour. So I've got more executions, more rows processed, more logical reads, etc. Yep, great question though.
Perfect.
Now, if I go back to actually I'm going to go back to a 10-minute time period just because it'd be less data to pull. But here, if I look at my weights during this 10-minute time period, I can see that I do have a lot of memory CPU, which is good. Again, if that's my constraint, then that's easily solvable. But I also have a lot of locking, right? I've got this mutual shared, I've got this exclusive locking. So if I want to see what kind of locking and blocking impacts I had within my database environment, I can go back to time slice, and guess what? We conveniently give you a correlation tab down below to look at the impacts of the blocking. So if I'm kind of have the first tab here selected, the impact of top root blocking sessions, these are the culprits, right? These are the bad guys. These are the ones that are causing the blocking to occur within my environment. If I look at the top waiting SQL statements, it's kind of the other side of the coin here. These are the victims, right? These are the ones that are waiting on locks to be released by these other sessions, by these other SQL statements. Okay, so it really allows you to get a very complete picture of, number one, is locking and blocking an issue within my environment? And if it is, how much so? And historically, how much of a problem has this been? Is this something, this multi-threading, this concurrent access to data, is that something that I should be concerned about? And there are lots of, I won't go into the strategies to fix it, but there are lots of strategies to mitigate this kind of behavior. Okay? Spoiler alert, it comes down to a lot of data modeling. If I want to see the tree of the blockers during this time period, I can select the blockers tab, and then I get this awesome kind of hierarchical tree on, again, who was my culprit, so who was my bad guy in this case, who are my victims. So this guy was blocking a whole bunch of different SPIDs. If I want details about what that bad guy was running during this time frame, I click on details, and then I get a list of SQL statements that he was running during this time frame and how long they ran. Right, so some fantastic information to fill in all those gaps so that you guys can do the forensics or the analysis that you need to determine what's causing the issues. Okay, cool. So that is locking and blocking. Hopefully that gives you guys a good idea of the postmortem. I did want to mention one more thing, because one of the weights or one of the activities within, sorry, hang on one sec. Sorry guys, still on my first cup of coffee over here. One of the activities that I saw was CPU and memory, and I wanted to check on that within my time slices, because one thing we also do is give this correlation tab down below of what are my resources doing compared to my weights above. So in this case, since I did at the 3:40 time frame, since I did see a lot of activity with respect to CPU, I did want to check the health of my CPU at a high level, and I can see here that it's probably not good, right? This is just a demo environment, so we kind of peg it on purpose. But you know, if this were a production live environment, kind of mission critical, this would not be okay. I never want to see my CPU pegged like that. So no wonder we're spending a lot of time trying to get CPU cycles, and actually a lot of my operating system asks or requests from the database are probably sitting in a runnable state. Remember the queue or the line at the grocery store? That's probably where a lot of my processes are sitting, because CPU is just being pegged. Okay, but if it's not CPU, you can look at other metrics such as like page life expectancy. That gives you a really good indicator of, do I have any memory pressure? You can look at the operating system memory utilization. For SQL Server, that's a little bit misleading, because SQL Server is going to grow into your max server size. It's going to go ahead and pre-allocate that for SQL Server, so you can play around with the thresholds on that if that's not exactly what you want to see. But we also give you active memory. So within the memory that you've allocated to SQL Server, how much of it is actually being used, right? We can track that. Plus how much is being divided between the buffer cache and the plan cache. So you can see all those kind of distinctions. Okay.
I think we've been able to answer the question that George asked us regarding why something is slow. What's going to be next?
What's next? So yeah, there's a couple other features that I wanted to kind of dive into here within DPA. And one of them, though, is being proactive. So if you guys have a little bit of time in your busy schedules, and I get it, trust me, but what you can do is, and I usually like to start with the weights overall, so to get a real high-level picture of what activities are going on within my database environment. If I want to be proactive, I can take a look at this and see, hey, it looks like memory CPU is the #1 activity on a day-to-day basis. We've got a little bit of an anomaly here starting around the 22nd of September, but in a general sense, and it looks like that's kind of cooled off now a little bit. But if I look at resources, I can definitely see that CPU utilization is high pretty much across the board. So if I wanted to make things run faster within the specific instance, I would give it more CPU, right? Again, be cognizant of what that does from a licensing perspective because it is based on cores, but I would definitely throw some more CPUs at this, and I could probably reduce a lot of the wait times or the times that end users are waiting for a response back from my database engine significantly just by adding this. By the way, the statements that were using CPU to complete their transactions, if I can get them to run faster, remember all that locking and blocking activity that I showed you? That speeds up significantly as well, because really that is another strategy for fixing the locking and blocking issue, is to get the culprits, to get the things that are actually causing the blocking to run faster, right? And that releases the floodgates. Okay, so a couple other features I want to point out. This trend view is fantastic, gives a real good high-level visibility of my environment, kind of paints a picture of my performance history within my environment. Very easy drill down, follow the big bar approach. I can see right off the bat that something went kind of off the rails on September 22nd. Love the correlation tabs down below, the ability to see, is the wait time above being driven by some kind of resource constraint? Is it being driven by some kind of blocking or deadlock constraint, things like that? We have a historical chart, so for any given SQL, if you want to view the historical chart, it will tell you kind of when it was introduced in your environment, what kind of wait time it is experiencing, how much executions, all those are statistics, right? Rows processed, logical reads, physical reads, things like that. So I can see for this specific SQL statement, it had not run prior to September 22nd, so that's when it's kind of got introduced into my environment. I can see the number of executions, and I can see the wait time above, by the way, reflects very closely to the number of executions. So I can see that the number of executions is driving the wait time in the chart above. Very close correlation there. If I scroll down, I can see the amount of rows processed, the logical reads, and then we give you a couple other charts at the bottom here that I find very useful as well. The average wait time per execution. So this is one of those average lines that says, hey, in the past 30 days or whatever, this kind of metric is drawing data from, this August 29th through September 28th, it will say, it'll plot a line for you and say, hey, here's the average time it takes to run once in my environment. So you can look at that line and you can look at the trend of the data being plotted. Now this doesn't have a whole lot of days of data, but if it did, you could see, well, am I doing better? In other words, is the time per execution going down, or is it increasing? And if it's increasing, if you have executions like in the hundreds of thousands or millions, that could be a real problem, right? Might not be felt by end users yet, but it's definitely trending in the wrong direction. So it is going to bite you at some point.
So that's probably being proactive, or as proactive as you can get, because you're pretty much predicting that something is going to go wrong.
Yes, exactly. And that is a pretty good indicator that things will not be good soon. So definitely something that you want to dig into on that SQL statement. And again, using the data above, we can see what is driving that increase of wait time, right? Is it just a sheer volume kind of proposition, so the executions are increasing, or is it having to parse through more data? Are my logical reads increasing to the point where, the data growth within my database, let's say the tables that it's hitting, it's just having to parse through way more records. All right. The other chart that it gives you down here is a typical day of wait. This one's a nice one because it can show you whether something is kind of being kicked off on a schedule or if it's end user driven. In this case, it looks like a program that is just running periodically. So it's just going to run this statement throughout the day, throughout every hour of the day, versus if it was end user driven, I would really expect to see more of a bell curve. So I'd expect to see it kind of ramp up around 7 or 8 a.m., maybe peak sometime midday, maybe have a couple peaks, because of lunchtime and stuff, and then taper off toward the evening hours. So this gives you an idea of how this SQL statement is being used or called within your environment, like when it's most active. So very helpful as well, just to get that profile. There is another view here I'm going to flip to. It's called the Virtualization View. This is if you're running in a virtualized environment on VMware as your hypervisor, you can use this plugin to get a deep dive look at your VM infrastructure. So this is one of those views that DBAs often lose when you go virtualized because unless you have access to vSphere or vCenter, a lot of times the VM admin is the one that has access to this stuff, but they don't have the same charter as DBAs, right? Their job is to spread the load across all the ESXi nodes within the cluster. They don't necessarily care about your database specifically, but you do. So here we start with the weights again because we always want to start with the weights. But then down below you can see that we get this layered cake look, I don't know what to call it, of different metrics. But what this allows you to see is the activity, are the weights above being driven from the instance? So in other words, am I seeing some kind of pressure here within my instance metrics? Is it being driven from my virtual machine or guest operating system? And that's this layer here. Is it being caused by maybe a noisy neighbor that's residing on my same physical host, my same ESXi node, and that would be this layer here? Or is it caused by some kind of storage issue? So we've got even the data store data down here. One thing to look for is changes in your environment. So, that was always the question that I asked almost immediately. If things went south, if we had performance problems, I would say, what changed? Because, contrary to popular belief, things usually don't spontaneously combust. So something usually changes in the environment.
Like vMotion or something like that? Another VM popping onto the same host? Or?
No, exactly. That is exactly right. So if those kind of changes occur, we will annotate them here within this chart. So if I hover over this arrow, it gives me a list of the events that occurred, like things being powered on, powered off, vMotion events, exactly. So if the circle is gray with an arrow in it, it means something changed in my neighborhood. So in other words, something changed on the physical ESXi node that I reside on, but not specific to my VM. If it is blue with an arrow in it, which I don't see any of those events on here, it means something changed on my VM. So it could have been, hey, I increased the vCPUs by 2. I was vMotion to another physical server. I had some kind of reservation change or shares changed or prioritization to resources.
How does it pick up this data? Does it pull from vCenter or using the VMware API? Or?
It does. Actually, you nailed it. So we call the VMware API, we call it once every 2 minutes, but within that 2-minute time period, we will actually ask for 6 data points. So the granularity of the resource metrics here from vCenter are every 20 seconds.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, great question. And if I want to, we of course alert if you guys are going over some kind of threshold. So if I do want to see what that metric actually is, I can click on it and then get a scale on the left-hand side, right? And this is one of those perfect things of VM CPU ready time. So if anybody doesn't know what that is, it's your virtual machine asking for CPU cycles from the physical host and having to wait for those cycles. Now, if I want to see where I fit in the pecking order as far as prioritization goes for the hypervisor, I can click on VM config. This is going to actually real-time go and ad hoc ask vCenter, hey, give me the config of the current situation for my physical host and for my VM. Hopefully this will return.
So that's probably what you were referring to when you were mentioning about coming prepared with empirical data, because you can justify what you need to allocate more CPU. You can also see the correlation with lockers and how it affects other, obviously, machines in your environment, as well as any other instances and databases for that matter that are related to it. So.
That's right. And unless I can answer the why, how can I fix it? So
absolutely.
Also, that gets you down to a definitive root cause, so I'm not chasing symptoms, right? I'm not wasting my time addressing things that really don't need to be touched, or it kind of helps me prioritize my own efforts. Okay, so I can't get to VM config right now, but if I were able to click into that, and we're changing a bunch of stuff in our environment now, kind of moving over to the next release, which is coming out very soon, so that might be what's happening. But if I were able to get into VM config, it would show me all the other VMs that are running on the same physical host. So all the other guest operating systems that I'm in competition with for these shared physical resources, which is a very powerful kind of information for a DBA to have. Okay, so let's flip back over to the performance side here and drill into this guy again, since we've been picking on him all day. One other feature, if you guys do have some kind of storage issue, if you are spending a lot of time, wait time, in other words, in things like page.io latch, or on the Oracle side, something like a DB file sequential or a scattered read, then you know you're doing some kind of fetch of data from disk. So that is why we have provided this storage.io feature here. And I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but suffice it to say that this is a fantastic deep dive, drill in kind of ability to look at file specific performance. So I'm on reads, but I could easily flip over to writes as well. But within a 1 hour period, I get a heat map of which files were being hit the most or taxed the most from an IO perspective. I can select one of the files specifically, and this throughput versus latency is one of my favorite charts, and this shows me the latency experienced on this specific file versus the throughput. So the latency is how long it takes the operating system to service my read request from a database. The green, or the throughput, actually shows me how much volume I am shoving through to this file. So a lot of times you will see these are inversely related. Right, the longer it takes, the less data or volume I can get through to my storage subsystem. The other cool thing here is that I can see overall, is I/O something that is significant within my environment versus all the other weights within my database, like locking and blocking, even CPU activity. And even better, I can tell you what SQL statements are hitting this file, are driving the traffic for I/O for this file. So pretty nice deep dive. I wouldn't necessarily come here unless the weights told me to. In other words, I always focus on the weights first, right? But if I have significant disk activity or weights for my end users, absolutely I'm looking at storage I/O. Okay. Couple other features, and I want to be cognizant of time and respectful of everybody's time, but I do just want to point out we have alerts. Now, none of them come configured out of the box, and this is by intent. A lot of times with products that I've used in the past anyway, alerts become noise, right? If I get an alert and I'm not going to do anything because of it, why do I want that alert? So we want you to be very thoughtful, very intentful. If you're going to set up some alerts, we want you to be able to think that through and really decide, yes, this is something that I want to know about. This is something that I can take an action on. This is something basically that I want to be woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning to see, right? We do have reports, some fantastic reports out there that can go back prior to the 30 days of detail here. So they can look at the entire collection history of your data. So that's kind of neat. It also gives you an ability to kind of zero in or filter whatever you want to see.
So what are the retention settings then? Obviously, you're seeing like a 30 days worth of diagnostics data, let's call it that way, until you go, or unless that you go to the report, in which case you can go backwards in time. And what are the restrictions? How much data do you collect?
Yeah, great question. So the retention settings by default, and these are configurable, but out of the box, we keep 30 days of detail. Again, you can drill down to that second by second activity. Well, every day we're doing this roll up, so we're constantly doing this summarization. So we keep 1 hour's worth of, we keep a summary data at the 1 hour granularity for 90 days, and then we keep daily up to 5 years. So you can see that past a historical. Now, from a performance perspective, I would say that, yes, it's nice to have that historical data there, but really from a performance perspective, you know, the value of the data, yeah, as it moves to the left, it's like, are you going to go fix something that was an issue like 4 years ago? Probably not. Yeah, but it's there. So you can, you know, and the reason we wanted it there is if you guys are doing good work, if you're being proactive, if you're doing things to improve the performance of your database environment, we want you to be able to show that. So using the reports, you can now get that empirical evidence and take it to your manager and say, hey, I need a raise.
Absolutely. So that's what everyone wants, right? So
Exactly. Yep. We also have the ability to improve the extensibility. So if you guys have rolled your own alerts or SQL queries and stuff to pull certain metrics during performance problems, you can build those right into DPA. So the nice thing about that is if there's a performance problem and you're on a team, not everybody has to jump in and start to run their queries, right? Let DPA pull it, and then everybody can see that data, but it's only pulled once. So it really does reduce the overhead on the already taxed server. So just to kind of wrap this up a little bit, what does this all mean? It means that you have all the necessary data to answer all of the important questions. Again, you can answer the who, what, when, where, and especially the why performance hits have occurred. So definitely have answers. Let DPA do the heavy lifting. And honestly, me personally, I'd rather be drinking a pint with friends or walking through the park with my family rather than, you know, kind of figuring out database issues. Hang on though. I'd like to reverse the order of those just in case my wife.
Yeah, I don't think your wife will actually watch the webinar, so I think we can be safe.
Okay, so keep the original order.
Let's keep it that way. Yeah, let's keep it that way. So, guys, even though, well, we could potentially say that this is officially a Q&A session now. So instead of flipping the screens, I'm going to keep Rob as a presenter. So if there are any questions that perhaps require input from the demo, we're already there. So feel free to type your questions in the chat box, and let's see if there's something coming in.
Or maybe I just did that nice of a job explaining everything.
Yeah, I was going to say. At the same time, we just hit, I think, 3 p.m. in here. So everyone, well, we actually have a statement rather than a question. All good. So you actually did a good job. So
Oh, thank you. And
thanks, Daniel.
I tell you, the time flew by. That felt really, really quick. But if we don't have any other questions or anything, I would just like to say, first of all, thank you very much to Prosperon and Jesus for putting up with me and allowing them to join me to join these again. But also, I'd really like to especially thank everybody who participated in this call and taking time away from your very busy schedules to step away with us for a bit. I get that.
Absolutely.
Time is probably our scarcest resource.
Absolutely, I echo that statement. There's one question coming in though. Does it cover RAC environments on Oracle from Giles?
Absolutely. So let me, great thought to stay within the environment. Let's see, do we have one being monitored here? I don't see one called out specifically as an Oracle rack, but we absolutely do. So if anybody has an Oracle rack in their environment, what we would do is you would register both or all the instances for that Oracle rack environment. What it'll do is it'll create automatically a grouping on the home page where I just was on the main dashboard that has all the instances, all the rack instances underneath it, and then it will give you insight into each instance performance. But also, if you click on the overhead group, the overall group for the rack environment, it'll show you additional information like the impact of running in a rack environment. So all those GC kind of wait events, those global cache wait events, the shipping the blocks across the interconnect and stuff, you will see that impact. So a really fantastic view, really powerful and helpful from a rack perspective.
So just to confirm, is rack aware, right? You don't really have to relay them manually or make them part of a group. It just does it automatically.
We will do that for you. So even when you go to register the instance, let's hop back out here. So if I register a DB instance for monitoring, let's say it is rack, we will actually detect that during registration as you walk through this wizard.
Yep, perfect. That's quite useful. Absolutely.
So we are rack aware, yes.
Fantastic. Well, I don't think there are more questions. So Rob, once again, thank you so much for joining us today. I think it's been a bit better today because you didn't have to wake up 2 o'clock in the morning just to present.
I'm a little fresher than I was previously.
We'll be sending the recording to everyone that attended together with the 2 previous webinars so that you guys have, I guess, visibility onto the full series. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to help. Thank you, everyone. Let's speak soon.
Thanks, Jesus.